We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's February 9th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is Arirang's new daily morning program, News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dain-hong.
Happy morning, everyone.
Happy morning, and Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Every day we do make a news feed for the new generation, and we're looking at the top trending hashtags on social media over the past 24 hours. Here they are. The first hashtag is #SoToo. U.S. President Joe Biden made his second State of the Union address on Wednesday. He hailed the recovery of the U.S. economy and mentioned his historic record of creating 12 million jobs. Biden also covered key issues like police reform and support for Ukraine. Overall, audience reactions were more positive than the previous year. The second hashtag is fine dust. A fine dust warning was issued for the Greater Seoul area on Tuesday as smog covered the peninsula, but from today we'll be able to breathe in some fresh air. Weather analysts are forecasting rain or snow from the evening, clearing up skies even more. The last hashtag is esports. According to the gaming industry, the Korea Sports Promotion Foundation is trying to allow betting in esports. Talks are underway with Korea's Esports Association and LCK, which is the primary competition in the country for the game League of Legends. If the plan goes ahead, League of Legends could be the first game to be available on sports betting Toto services from next year. Now, why don't we delve deeper into the third hashtag, which is esports? Now, if people start betting on esports, more attention and investment will be poured into the industry. The betting money can be used to invest more in pro gamers and venues. But there are some concerns. A lot of game analysts are worried about the fairness of the sport. Users' networks can affect performance, for example, and there's also the concept of game balance, where specific strengths of a character or strategy are offset proportionally to prevent domination by one character or approach. Also, some pointed out that the main consumers of esports are teens and people in their 20s, which would make them very vulnerable to becoming addicted to gambling. Now, if we expand our newsfeed in the studio, Walter, what did you think about this issue?
Okay, so I'm a massive sports fan, but when I first heard about esports, I was sort of on the bandwagon that it's not really sports, it's just computer games. However, after looking a little bit more deep into it, though it's not physically as draining as some other sports, let's say like football, it does take a lot of practice to become pro level. So now I completely understand that esports should be called a sport. Now, saying that, the reason why is now it's considered a sport. It should be treated just like every other sport, and other sports are getting betted on all the time. And people are worrying that it is a younger crowd that they're attracting, therefore younger people will be forced to bet. But a lot of people who are interested in soccer, football, other sports, they're also young fans as well. So they need to learn as well. There's a lot more rules, it's more detailed, but to talk about also the investment in it. Now, not many people know that actually K-gaming is one of the biggest entertainment exports in Korea, outpacing K-movies and surprisingly K-pop. So it's worth investing more into it.
Right. And Cheska, what are your thoughts on this issue?
So Walter brought up a very interesting point. So I actually had a chance to be a team manager for one of the largest global e-game championship. And actually, as Walter mentioned, it actually opened my eyes to how grand and incredibly big the scale is and the global fervor of it all. But now for me, because I saw it on site, I realized that the audience and the players were relatively young, in the early 20s, and some even teenagers. So what I do fear is that because the game is so intense in speed and the graphics involved in as well, that it's so easy to get swept up by the heat and momentum of it all, and sometimes even greater than physical sports. So I do fear that without proper control, there might be a whirlwind that cannot be maintained.
So we'll have to see what happens, and it'll take some time and a lot of discussions to make sure that this is done in a healthy and moderate way. Now, thank you. That was our news feed for today. Moving on, NewsGen discusses different topics each day. Here's what we have for you today. In South Korea, where out-of-wedlock birth rates hover at around 2%,
The concept of living with your partner before marriage isn't the norm, but recent surveys show that a growing number of millennials and Gen Z are more open to this idea. As a matter of fact, more are starting to think that living together is good practice before getting married, or just another way of living. Today, NewsGen looks at 3 questions. 1. Why has living together without being married been considered taboo before? 2. How did perceptions change towards living together before marriage? 3. What are some advantages of welcoming this new culture or perspective?
As we just saw, we're going to be talking about moving in with your partner before or even without getting married. And though it may seem like a familiar concept to people in some countries around the world, in Korea, it's not something a lot of people would openly admit. There's still some social stigma behind this concept. And if I bring the discussion here in the studio, I would like to ask you to what you think about this social stigma and living together with your partner before getting married.
Yeah, so there is this social stigma here, especially in Korea and many other Asian countries, I believe, as well, like India, for example. Now, I think it should be lifted because I only see benefits in living together.
Oh, okay.
I believe it's better for the long run. Now, if we look at the subject of marriage, which is a lot of people want to eventually get married after living together. Let's take the romantic aspect out of marriage for a second.
What?
Sorry,
What?
When he's married.
What did you say?
Sorry, I know you're a very romantic kind of person, but let's look at it in reality and say that it is a massive commitment, and not just emotionally, but legally as well. You are signing a legal document to say that you are with this person. Now, in my opinion, it's best to live together, to test the waters, make the environment sort of, are you going to be okay with this person? And it's a simple way, and I guess a less costs, it's going to cost you a lot less to do it this way instead of going straight from not living together to married to living together. So I'm all for living together before marriage.
You just stabbed me right in the gut when you say take the romantic out of the relationship.
Sorry.
Exactly.
That is like my core thing. But Walter, I actually have a question. So would you be okay marrying or dating someone who has lived with someone before?
Okay, so I grew up in basically a very Western society, so it's very normal in Australia to do that. You know, you might have multiple people that you've lived with before you eventually meet the one. However, I can't speak for everyone here in Korea, especially the males. It might be a bit different from their perspective because a lot of people don't want to do that as well.
Right, and you brought up a really good point because in Korea, as you mentioned, Yen, the social stigma is very, very strong. And because culturally we're a very conservative society, in some cases, the young couples, cannot tell their parents the truth about the fact that they're living together with their loved ones. And it's sad, but you see in the TV dramas and movies where they make a comedic scene about shoving their boyfriends and girlfriends into the bathroom when the parents come for an unexpected visit because it's a stigma to be sharing the fact that you are living with someone. So, but for me, I think stigma aside, the more important question is the emotional risk and the investment involved. So Walter might disagree with this, but for me, I think moving out or ending the relationship when you're with someone is much harder. And I heard testimonials, it's almost like an early stage divorce.
Right, because you're with that person 24/7.
Exactly. You know, the mug cup and the toilet paper reminds you of the dear old Mr. and Miss someone, right? And I think another thing that a lot of surveys have responded is the unexpected pregnancy and the lack of privacy become very important issues when you move in together with someone. So I think there's a lot to consider before you make the big commitment. Yeah.
There's definitely a lot to consider, but here in Korea, this concept has been considered quite peculiar. There's even a separate term for it called 동거.
Right.
But if you look abroad, there's not like an exact separate word for this concept. But why do you think more Koreans are starting to perceive this in a more positive light? And why do you think more are on board with moving in with their partner before marriage?
So if we take a look at the screen, I've prepared some stats that might illustrate some of these very interesting points about the conception and how people perceive moving together. So this first survey shows people's perception on moving together but unmarried. Almost half of people surveyed responded positively to the idea, which illustrates the trend that our generation generation is actually opening up to the idea of cohabitation,
right,
regardless of marriage, which is interesting. Now, if we take a look at the second statistics and notice something interesting. So once we adjust the question with the condition for marriage, we see a pretty big change, and less than half of people favored living together without the promise of marriage. But with that promise, the response spiked to about 70%.
Wow.
And what's more interesting is the people who responded with uncertainty and negativity dropped to almost half. So this clearly demonstrates that the condition for marriage in the future and the end goal is actually very important for deciding whether you want to move in together or not.
Right, and if I read into that psychology, I think it's because humans tend to like it when they have control over the situation.
Very true.
And when we're certain about it, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And Walter, how is living abroad, living with your partner before marriage like abroad?
Well, I know that it's quite different, right? So a lot of Western countries, let's say America or Australia, just for an example, you know, a long time ago, they also were very similar to Korea. They weren't really for living together before getting married, but as time passed, it changed, and now it's very much accepted and very much the norm in society. Now, I know that roughly around 8 out of 10 from the younger generations, the millennials or let's say the Gen Z, thought it was acceptable for unmarried couples to live together, even if they don't have plans to get married. So this is a trend changing over the years.
Right, and I see like the younger the generation becomes, the more open they seem to be abroad, right?
It appears that way, yes.
And Walter, I actually have a quick question.
Yes.
Because I'm the inexperienced one here. I have a lot of questions that I want to learn from. Was there something unexpected or like I don't know, something that caught you off guard when you moved into
Well, let me talk about I've got a few different situations, right?
Okay.
Let me talk about one where I was with a ex-girlfriend before, well, obviously she's ex now. So, yes, an ex-girlfriend. We were high school, I guess, lovers. And we were together for 2 years, and then we moved in together.
Okay.
And we were together for a whole 2-3 months.
What?
Yes, when we were living together. So though we found
I
it...
love how you say whole two.
I know, I was expecting something really longer.
Trust me, it felt a lot longer than that. However,
That's true.
yeah, so sometimes it works, and obviously it didn't at that time. But for my wife, and to answer your question, Cheska, we live very happily together, if she's watching, just to make sure. But yes, like example, the cleanliness levels, right? My wife is what I would say a clean freak in my opinion. I don't think I'm very dirty, but I'm not up to her level. So to be, you know, comparing each other on cleanliness levels was a very big shock, because I was going into it thinking, hey, I'm a clean guy. And she was like, are you sure?
She did that finger thing.
Are you sure? And I was like, okay.
She did the index finger, checking if
She
you're
didn't
clean
have
or
to say
not.
anything. She just had to do something. So yes, no. To answer your question, yes.
Yeah, nonverbal communication is so powerful.
I think sometimes it can deliver more messages than
I know.
a couple of words, yeah.
Now, Cheska, now I would like to ask you, you seem to be quite cautious about moving in with your partner before marriage. Then what do you think are some things to keep in mind?
So Walter, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom to the novice. But actually what he said reminded me of this hilarious but sagacious quote where it said, moving in together is like being forced into a couple's retreat during Hunger Games.
During Hunger
Because the most important thing becomes who ate the last banana, who drank the last milk, and who used more toilet paper. and
you can relate to that.
Walter's over there nodding silently. He's like the Yoda, right? The know-it-all. But aside from that, I think, and Walter would probably agree with me on this, I think the most important thing is an open and honest conversation to the point where you can be a little bit vulnerable.
Right.
Because I read an article on NPR that said, you know, relationships don't necessarily have to follow a linear trajectory, meaning going from the dating to the moving in to the marriage. It's never a one and all solution. So you have to be open to talking to your partner and adjusting it accordingly if it doesn't work. And also learning the dance of the fight. So if your wife comes in, does this
with the finger, yes.
You have to
meditate.
You have to not simply avoid it, because you're literally your face and space all the time with your partner.
Exactly.
So not just avoiding the fight, but learning to fight in a way that moves you forward.
Right, communicating your needs and finding the right direction. All right, and why don't we use this time to now hear from an expert who analyzes such changes and the evolution of relationship trends. Now, we have a familiar face joining us through Zoom. It's Meredith Turitz, the editor of BBC Work Life. Great to have you back, Meredith.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Meredith, compared to other generations, the younger population are more open to moving in together before getting married. And what does this tell us?
So this is a really interesting piece of data that came out of the University College of London and St. Andrews in 2022. And what it's told us is that attitudes have changed quite a bit. Millennials really aren't moving in with their partners as a kind of trial marriage. And that's really interesting because they are actually more likely, people born in the 80s, to split with the first person that they've moved in with versus people in the 70s that they were born in the 70s that they are compared with. So it really shows an evolution of the way that younger generations are starting to think about, why they're moving in. And a lot of it has to do with financial constraints. So the younger generations are becoming a lot more practical. They're deciding, we can save some money if we move in together. And so it's also showing a shift in priorities.
I see. And do you two have any questions you'd like to ask Meredith?
Meredith, I'm sure you've heard, but we've been passionately discussing here in the studio about the pros and cons of moving in. And there can be some unforeseen consequences, I feel, if you don't think it through. What are some things that we should be aware of before deciding to move in together?
I think financial situations are really a big piece of it. So the financial situation a lot of times drives the why people move in together. So I think that's a really important thing for people to be thinking about. And then just intentionality, where people are going to end up. Are they looking at this as a trial marriage in the same way that their partner is, or is it sort of a move-in of convenience? So I think having those expectations level is really important in the conversation.
And how will more people moving in together affect marriage trends in the future, do you think?
So it's interesting. We don't have a ton of information on Gen Z right now, so we'll have to kind of see how it plays out. One thing that's really interesting, however, is that Gen Z has a pattern right now of really investing in themselves more and finding themselves before they move to, share space with a partner or, even get married. So as Gen Z focuses on themselves a little more, this actually could change the timeline for people moving in together and eventually getting married.
All right. Thank you, Meredith. It was a second time having you here. And as always, you've given us really concise, great insight. Thank you so much.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now, bringing the discussion back to the studio, any points that Meredith mentioned that might have fascinated you?
Definitely the point about the finance, because I know it still hurts that Walter said you have to take the romance out of some of these parts. But I mean, that is the reality, right? As we mentioned before, it's kind of like being forced into Hunger Games. You have to think about the finance aspect of it as well. And the fact that the Gen Z, I mean, myself included, I talked about the emotional risk, but I think we're a generation that care about ourselves just as much as we care about the other person.
Right.
So I think that timeline would also shift based on whether I feel ready or whether I feel good. Yeah.
All right. And what about you, Walter?
Just to quickly add on to the finance situation as well, it can be somewhat difficult, obviously, to invest in the couple, but some couples actually look at it as sort of a positive where they won't have to pay so much, right? So therefore, it can be looked at both ways. I know that some couples, they go, hey, if we move in together, we can save all this money for our marriage in the future. So that also helps.
Right, and I think a key word that could be added onto our list of what defines millennials and the new generation Gen Z is practicality.
Right.
We really prioritize practicality. All right, given that we are a live morning program, we always ask our viewers questions related to our discussion topic in advance, and we use this time to share with you what they had to say. So we asked our viewers what they feel about moving in before marriage, and Politics said it's normal and common in California California. I wouldn't marry my partner until we've lived together for a long time. You really only know somebody after you've lived with them. Priyanka Chakraborty said, it's not normal in most of India. However, I think it's extremely beneficial. I wouldn't want to marry until we have lived together. Tasmina Tassin said, I'm from Bangladesh, and to live with someone before marriage is not well received. I think a lot of Korean viewers, especially from older generations, can relate to that one. Now, what do you two think about these comments, starting with Cheska?
I think the comment from Politic is also from Walter.
Very similar comments.
I just try to get my input on the show more these days, I think.
I know, we seem to be getting a lot of your voice into our show, which is great. I love it. But but I think, Walter, what you mentioned is exactly the same comment as
Politics
made. But I think I definitely do agree with the point that moving in together can be a trial run if ran smoothly.
Right. What about you, Walter?
Obviously, the last two comments did kind of catch my eye, where like Priyanka and Tasmina, they're both against it, but I think it's because of their culture, right? And we have to respect that. We completely understand that it's not normal for many cultures to also, you know, move in before getting married. I'm not completely against not doing that as well, because it's a cultural thing.
Definitely. And we do upload questions related to our discussion topic for our viewers to answer. And if you want to participate, please search Arirang News on YouTube and look into our community tab. The link is right below. Now, we've come to the final part of our discussion for today. And Walter, I would like to ask, if cohabitation becomes the norm in Korea, how do you think changes will come forth?
Well, for me, I'm hoping to see like a decrease in divorce rate. As we know, it's on the up, and also the birth rate, we see it on the down. We would like it to go up as well. But the whole point is to learn about each other before we get married. Are we the right people? We don't want to see those divorce rates go up. So before getting married, maybe it's good to try out the situation, like I said. For me, having the experience of living with an ex-partner has really helped my marriage, because now I know, you know, oh, I should be like this around this person, or I should be more understanding of the other person.
Right.
So I definitely think people need to see it from this perspective, and that's what will change Korea, I believe.
I think this is really good advice for people who haven't tried it and who want to test it out in the future. All right, today we talked about living together before getting married, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you the topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainhong.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And Walter Lee.
Always happy to be here.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.